Emily's flight hummed with the tired rhythms of late afternoon travel, the soft murmur of headphones, the low clink of trays, the periodic bark of the flight attendant's microphone. She had been delayed, taxi stuck in a construction detour, so when she finally boarded, the cabin felt like a scene already in motion. Window seat 17A. She smiled at the polite nod of the man in 17B and made her way down the aisle with the desperate eagerness of someone who preferred the sky to traffic. At the rear, a flight attendant with quick hands and a slower smile stopped her. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you in 16C?" His voice was warm, the kind learned in airports and honed in cross-country schedules. "No, I'm in 17A." She waved her phone, the boarding pass glowing in her palm. He glanced at the device, at the printout, then at her. "Seat 17A is taken, ma'am." Taken. Her stomach did a small flip. "By whom?" "A young passenger, sir," he said, nodding toward a short boy with a backpack, settling into 17A with wide, nervous eyes. He wore a school uniform, his shoes scuffed at the toes. A woman, his guardian perhaps, was speaking softly to him in a nearby seat. "It's assigned to him. I'm sorry for the confusion." Emily felt irritation bubble up, small, sharp, the kind that arrives when plans are trimmed at the edges. She had traveled this route a dozen times in the past year. Changing a seat seemed unnecessary, a petty inconvenience. "Is there another window seat?" she asked, trying to keep patience thin around the edges. "We could move you to 16A, the attendant offered. She hesitated, glanced back at the boy. He looked so young. He cast a shy glance her way when their eyes met, then returned to fiddling with a strap on his backpack. His hands were small and certain. The woman with him said something in a soft, non-English cadence. Emily's chest tightened for reasons she did not immediately name. "That's fine," she said, forcing a smile that felt like a practice thing. 16A is fine. Seat 16A was not a calamity. The view out the window was the same sliver of sky. She settled in, clicked her seatbelt, and watched the pre-flight rituals with the kind of distracted boredom that turns into observation. The plane rolled, then lifted. The city shrank. People returned to their interiors, novels, naps, devices. The boy in 17A leaned his head back and hummed a small tune, eyes closed. Somewhere near Cruz, the woman who had been with the boy, she caught the steward's name on a badge. Aisha stood and made her way to the galley. Emily watched her go, then did something she hadn't planned. She reached into her bag for the in-flight magazine. Fingers grazing the glossy pages, she found a profile piece on the airline's founder, a man known for reinvention and stubborn philanthropy. A photograph of him, salt and pepper hair, a smile that had survived headlines, sat beside a column about the company's expansion and its new community initiatives. She read of deals, airport lounges, and a foundation that funded schools in cities across the country. The narrative had a familiar cadence. Self-made, visionary, a man who expected both excellence and loyalty. Emily glanced up, and the boy's backpack had a small patch sewn on the strap. The airline's logo, the same crest that was on the founder's photograph. It was an idle connection. People who worked for a company wore its logo. People who loved it sometimes carried keepsakes. She folded the magazine and tucked it away. An hour later, turbulence rumbled like a distant drum. The cabin lights dimmed. The pilot's voice informed them of a bumpy corridor ahead. "Ma'am," the young flight attendant approached again, careful. "Would you mind, there are a few seats we need to shift around to accommodate a family." "Of course," Emily said. They shuffled. A man in a suit with a cufflink that gleamed like an afterthought reclaimed an empty seat beside 17A, and the woman who'd been with the boy returned, guiding him gently. The child clutched a worn paperback, and the airline patch on his backpack seemed to have peeled at the edges. The man, the new passenger, sat with that quiet power that occupied a space without needing to claim it. When he extended his hand to the boy, their greeting was intimate, a private weather. Emily's curiosity, which had been simmering like a pot left too long, boiled over. During the beverage service, she leaned forward. "Is he your son?" she asked before she could stop herself. The question felt intrusive, But the man smiled like someone who had been asked stranger things in stranger rooms. He looked down at the boy, the expression softening. Yes, he said simply. His name is Malik. A hush settled around Emily. The man's voice carried a calm that distracted from the fact that his cufflink was engraved with the same crest she'd seen in the magazine. Tiny letters celebrating the airline. A shiver of recognition, like a fable's soft reveal. She swallowed and tried to fold the scene away as politeness required, but the corner of her mind had already begun to rewrite the afternoon. Malik, small, attentive, with a laugh that caught at the tail of some private joke, was not the image that many of the airline's glossy advertisements might have chosen for Founder's son. He was ordinary in his neat uniform and worn shoes. Yet every now and then, the man would catch his eye and send a look that made Malik beam as if he'd been the first person to understand a secret. Their bond punctured the social contours Emily had mapped in her head. "Do you travel often together?" she asked, cheeks warming at the forwardness of her own interest. The man, who introduced himself as Harold Johnson, shrugged. "Sometimes," he said. "We try. Work doesn't leave much room for sometimes most of the time, but family matters. Family matters more than schedules." That evening, the cabin dimmed further. Faces softened in the glow of screens. Emily drifted between dozing and wakefulness, the rhythm of engines a lullaby. The plane crossed a dark ribbon of ocean. A baby in the row ahead started to cry, and the world for a brief, bright moment was only that small sound. An announcement came, crisp and businesslike. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an operational request, Mr. Harold Johnson and party will be touring the forward galley shortly. Please cooperate with our cabin crew." The words felt like a stage cue. Emily's mind, suddenly too alert, remembered the magazine's profile, the foundation, the crest on the backpack. Her stomach folded into a knot of something between embarrassment and anticipation. When Harold stood, folded his jacket over his arm, and motioned to Malik, the boy's small hand slipped into his. They passed by Emily with the easy intimacy of people who had shared both triumph and apology. Harold paused and their eyes met. He smiled at her with a glance that carried no accusation, only a soft curiosity. "Thank you," he said, nodding at her seat, "for being flexible earlier." Emily's face warmed. "No problem. It was my mistake to assume. It happens," Harold replied. "People make assumptions all the time." The words were small, and in them she heard the echo of a lecture she had not yet given herself. He returned with Malik moments later, his hand lightly resting at the boy's shoulder. At the galley door, a cluster of flight attendants gave him a ripple of respect, their deference as automatic as a well-rehearsed dance. Emily watched, surprised at the way a single person's presence could condense attention like sunlight through a prism. On the descent into their destination, the captain announced connections, gate changes, a brief delay for a maintenance check. People rustled. In the wash of fluorescent light, the cabin's collective energy shifted from fatigue to urgency. Malik stood when the seatbelt light came on, smoothing his uniform, revealing a small fold of paper stuck in the back pocket of his backpack. He fumbled, glanced around, and a mischievous grin blossomed when he realized he had a spare window of time to trade stories. "Would you like to see my drawing?" Malik asked Emily, pointing with a smudge of pencil on his thumb. She blinked. "Your drawing?" He nodded and offered the scrap of paper with the sort of pride children carry when they invent stars. It was an airplane, roughly sketched, with a tiny figure at the window and a speech bubble that read, "Home." The plane was smiling. Emily felt something in her chest shift. The rawness of a shared human moment glowed brighter than the metallic insignia, the corporate histories, and the polite sentences exchanged. She took the paper and studied the smiling plane. "It's beautiful," she said. Malik's grin widened. "I like planes," he said. "My dad works with them." Her eyebrows rose, and she laughed, an involuntary release. "That's convenient." He shrugged as if convenience were the most natural thing. "They're my favorite." When the plane landed and the passengers stood, the bustle made it harder to connect. Harold and Malik moved through the aisle like a single thought. Before they disembarked, Harold stopped by Emily and offered his hand. "Emily," he said, I'm glad you sat near us today. She took it, noting again the warm firmness of his grip and the way his fingers closed with the surety of someone used to contracts and commitments. I'm glad I didn't start a scene, she answered, surprised by her own candor. We should all be glad sometimes, he replied. You never know. In the jetway, Aisha, the woman who'd been with Malik, turned to Emily and gave her a small, generous smile. Thank you, she said in accented English, for patience. It was nothing, Emily mumbled, but watched as Malik ran ahead to the waiting car, his backpack bouncing. He waved back at Harold, who lifted him and smoothed the hair at his temple with a tenderness Emily had not expected to see in a man of authority. Across the glass, a limousine with the airline's logo idling at the curb confirmed the thread she'd been following. Malik's father was the founder, a man who owned an empire of routes and call centers and loyalty programs. Yet the intimacy between father and son, that small domestic geography, remained unmapped by the company's glossy brochures. Days later, Emily found herself thinking about the flight not as an inconvenience, but as a small aperture through which she'd seen life rearrange itself. She kept the scrap of paper Malik had pressed into her hand. The pencil-smudged plane became a talisman on her desk. She started to notice the stories she told herself about other people, the assumptions that made quick cartography of strangers. The man in the suit was not just a CEO in polished shoes. He could be a father who joked about cereal flavors in the morning and who, despite power, left room on his calendar for a soccer recital. The boy in the uniform was not just a mascot for a brand. He was a child who liked to draw and who fell asleep to the click of overhead bins closing. One afternoon, Emily received an email from an address with a familiar crest in the footer. The subject line read, "Thank you for your patience." Inside a short note, "Miss Carter, my son Malik still talks about the kind lady who took the wrong seat and then smiled at his drawing. We are hosting a small foundation luncheon next month. If you'd care to attend, we'd be honored." Emily stared at her screen. The invitation felt like an unexpected expansion of the small thread they'd shared. She called to decline, thinking it presumptuous, then thought better. "Why not?" she said aloud. "Why not see how a public life meets a private one